finally done it, guys. I finally finished Naoki Urasawa's Monster. I've been reading it steadily over the course of maybe 1 or 2 weeks, well, 2 or 3 weeks I'd say, because I just really wanted to take my time with it. I didn't want to rush through it. You know, I've pretty much been reading one volume, dedicating myself to that one volume over like, you know, a few days time, you know, and it's just, I'm going to struggle with this review because it's going to be very difficult to pick out any bad points about this series because it's just simply that good. It is just simply amazing. Having read 20th Century Boys before I read this, I can see where Urasawa has improved his art style and his way of storytelling, because Monster, it has certain elements of it that are, you know, somewhat repetitive, which I'll get a little bit onto later on in the review. But basically the premise of the story, let's start with that. Okay, so the story kicks off in 1986 in Dusseldorf, Germany, and we're introduced to Dr. Kenzo Tenma, who's like the best neurosurgeon at Eisler Memorial Hospital. Is held in high regard by like all the other doctors and like all his patients that's worked on and everything, because he's literally the best and he's really kind-spirited. But unbeknownst to everybody else, Tenma is basically allowing himself to be used by the hospital director, Dr. Heinemann. Dr. Heinemann is basically a careerist, you know, he'll do anything for, you know, public acceptance, and, you know, just to basically, you know, he does everything for status, you know, and it's all about, you know, money and everything like that, and trying to advance his career and, you know, up the popularity of the hospital and things like that. So he's basically using Dr. Tenma to, you know, do his bidding, if so to speak. You know, it's basically Tenma's his puppet. You know, Tenma's basically on the right path, you know, and he's moving towards the peak of his success through Dr. Heinemann, you know, and it's all really for the wrong reasons. You know, Tenma's engaged to his daughter Eva Heinemann and all that. So basically, Tenma comes to a crossroads. You know, he's seen people suffering at the hands of, you know, wrongful decisions that he's been forced to make, and he's just ignored them. You know, like he had the chance to save the husband of, you know, a Turkish woman, and, you know, he didn't save him because, you know, he was made to save somebody else through the orders of Dr. Heinemann. So he's faced with this decision again, and the decision basically is he has to save the life of the mayor, who is had like a brain aneurysm or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was, or save the life of a little boy who's been shot in the head. And, you know, Tenma comes to a realization where, you know, it's really come to the crunch and shit has hit the fan for him. You know, he really has to question his own moral judgment, and he basically follows his heart and saves the life of the little boy against the will of Dr. Heinemann, who wanted to save the mayor's life, because basically if Tenma had have saved the mayor's life, you know, the hospital would have gotten more funding and, you know, a higher reputation and things like that, because he's the mayor of Dusseldorf, you know, he's the mayor of the city. So Tenma decides to save the life of the little boy who'd been shot in the head, and that basically just kick-starts a whirlwind, and that basically sets the premise for the whole story from that point on, because Tenma thus begins Tenma's downfall. You know, he gets completely ostracized by everyone. You know, Dr. Heinemann basically takes everything away from him. Tenma loses everything. He loses his engagement to Eva, Dr. Heinemann's daughter, loses the respect of, you know, all, you know, his peers, and he basically got, you know, down to rock bottom. You know, he's still working in the hospital, but, you know, is ineligible for any like promotions or anything like that, because he's basically sold his reputation. But he still sticks by his guns, and, you know, still doesn't regret making the decision to save the little boy at the end of the day, because he trusts his own moral judgment, which is commendable. But, you know, it just shows his weaknesses and his strengths from that point on. So without giving away too many spoilers, at the point in which Tenma's lost everything and his entire reputation's done, more disaster strikes in that the young boy who's been shot in the head has mysteriously vanished from the hospital, coinciding with murders of people who are linked to the goings on, like with things that are going on in hospital, all the political hospital politics that are going on. There's a few murders that happen, and those murders go completely unsolved. Tenma's completely in a whirlwind as to what's happened. We're introduced to a character called Inspector Lunge, who's part of the BKA, which is basically like the German FBI. I can't remember exactly how to say the actual word for BKA, what it stands for, because it's ridiculously long. But yeah, so that's, I know it's long-winded, but that is basically the premise, the introduction to the main story. It sounds long-winded, like I say, but that's basically just, it happens all in the space of one volume. So from 1986, seeing Tenma's downfall and the disappearance of the young boy who's been shot in the head, and the murders at the Eisler Memorial Hospital, it skips forward like 9 years, I believe, to like 1995, and everything's better than it was for Tenma. Tenma's being appointed as the head of neurosurgery at Eisler Memorial Hospital. He's got nothing weighing him down. He's able to make his own decisions and things like that. He's basically running the show. He's basically the head of the hospital. And everything is much better than it already was. Tenma's in a very comfortable position. And that's when his past comes back to bite him, and it turns out that and this may sound like a spoiler, but I wouldn't really regard it as a spoiler, because it is just basically the premise of the story itself. Finding out who the antagonist isn't necessarily part of the chase. We know all along who the antagonist is, so it's not like you get to find out like right at the end who it actually was. You get to find out like right at the beginning. So the little boy who'd been shot in the head like 9 years ago, who mysteriously vanished, was an orphan called Johann Liebert, and his past is completely unknown, but he comes back 9 years later as basically a serial killer. He kills one of Tenma's patients who had like ties with him, and Tenma basically realizes like he doesn't know whether or not he's made a huge mistake, or whether to stick with his guns and just kind of accept that what he's done, what he's essentially created or brought back to life is a monster, because that's the name of the series. Johann Liebert is the monster. So this is where the real meat of the story kicks in. Not only does Tenma have to come to terms with the fact that the young boy he risked his career to save is basically the devil incarnate, and is a serial killer, out to play with Tenma's mind. He also has to come to terms with that, but he also has to come to terms with the fact that the murders at the Eisler Memorial Hospital, the current serial murders of middle-aged couples like around Germany, and the murder of his patient Adolf Junkers, along with a few others as well, he has basically been framed for them, and he is the prime suspect in all of these murders. So the BKA is after him. Basically every single police force dotted around Germany is on the lookout for him. He's a fugitive, and he basically has to go on the run at the same time that he's trying to track down Johann. And the thing is, he's not doing it to prove his innocence. He's basically doing it to undo the mess that he's created and undo the monster that he has brought back to life. He's just doing it to rid the world of Johann, and it's a really difficult position to see Tenma in. You really empathise with the guy, because as he really struggles with the fact that he's essentially a man who breathes life. His job is to bring people back to peak health, but yet he is faced with the inescapable choice, not the inescapable choice, the inescapability of having to kill. He has to kill Johann, in order to undo what he's created. And the mental turmoil that he goes through is just, it's just masterfully written. Tenma basically goes, it's almost like a series of short stories, because Tenma basically treks all around Germany, and it crosses borders. He's in Germany, and then towards the second half of it is in Czechoslovakia, and it's basically like a series of short stories. Tenma meets people who are like almost in the same situation as him. Almost vying to try and prove their innocence. People who are like against the odds. People who are suffering from injustices, and it helps him as a character. He goes around helping different people, basically trying to acquire the skills in order to kill at the end of the day. People try to, he gets people who just like believe him just because he's got that, he's just got that characteristic. He's almost as enigmatic as Johann is himself. And it's not so much a game as cat and mouse, because it's not like, he's more trying to prove that Johann even exists. That's how much of an enigma Johann is himself. Is almost supernatural. So Johann's ability to control the human mind and manipulate people to basically do his killing for him is on par with just God tier. He is a godlike person. He literally just twists and molds people into what he wants them to be. People regard him as just even fellow serial killers who are just as twisted, if not more as he is, even regard him as just a new level of human consciousness. Well, the lack of human consciousness, because that's the thing. He almost just functions. It's like there's just nobody there. He's just a hunk of flesh that just functions to kill, and it's just amazing to see him. Because he's so fair looking and so unintimidating, but yet he just exudes this fear. He just distills this fear in people. And that's what makes him so scary, because he doesn't look intimidating, but yet he's just the devil. It is amazing. And one thing I liked about Johann's character is I could see a lot of influence Naoki Urasawa took from Johann. In his future works. Like, I can see a lot of resemblances in The Friend from 20th Century Boys. The Friend is also very charismatic and enigmatic, and has that power to control people, and they're both essentially almost the same person. It's really interesting to read another Naoki Urasawa work and see such a similar character, but similar but also completely different, if you if you know what I mean. I thought it was really, really excellent. And the thing is, that's not to say that Tenma isn't also just as clever as Johann. Tenma manages to go months and months and months, chasing leads and tracking down, potential places where Johann might be, whilst also trying to uncover his past, and whilst also trying to train in order to, be able to, in order to kill him. Tenma's never wielded a gun. Tenma's never shot a person in his life. He has to train in order to do these things. So, doing all of that, multitasking all of those different things whilst, also on the run, basically looking over your shoulder all the time for, the authorities or, assassins and things like that. Tenma basically managed to just dodge them all like a, like a rabbit going through the grass, being chased by foxes, and it's really, really amazing. The only thing that really ultimately is Tenma's weakness is, ironically, his sense of humanity, because obviously Johann doesn't have any humanity, but Tenma still retains that, that human emotion, and that can hold him back sometimes. Tenma finds himself in positions where, he could best Johann and, get one up on him, but he ends up drawing back, and, his reluctance kind of ultimately becomes, his main weakness, and he's constantly trying to fight, battle with himself, to try and, retain his sanity, which is just excellent to see. I absolutely love Tenma as a character, and that's basically the gist of the story, without giving away too many spoilers. It's Tenma trekking around, trying to uncover Johann's past, trying to, find leads on him, trying to tie everything together in order to understand someone who essentially isn't to be understood. I think that's one of the main messages of Monster. You know, Tenma isn't there to be understood. You know, he just is, and the reason he is what he is, you know, it questions morality, and it questions whether, you know, a monster like him is born or created, because it really delves into his past. And one thing I haven't even mentioned is that Johan has a twin sister who's completely sane, and you know is trying to, you know, come to terms with like her loss of memories and things like that, because she was there when Johan was shot in the head. You know, they were basically raised together but then split apart, and she's also on her own journey similar to Tenma, you know, in order to track him down, and you know, trying to understand, you know, trying to understand herself even. And Johan's sister Nina has to come to terms that she's directly related and has the exact same genetics as a man who is not only just the polar opposite of what she is, but something so inhuman and despicable, and she just finds him just disgusting and repugnant. And that's really interesting to see, you know, the different emotions and you know, things she goes through, you know, when she's like, you know, she's trying to slowly unlock her memories of her childhood and things like that, and just the different states she goes through is very interesting to see. So, you know, would I recommend Monster? Definitely. If you're wanting to read something that's dark and gritty, and you know, something you can really get your head stuck into, because there's so many different things to take into account when you're reading Monster. Like there's you know, real life historic thing, you know, issues and things like, you know, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and you know, the rise of communism after the Second World War, and things that, you know, influence the story but in like a massive way. You know, there's, you know, things like like I said before, you know, political and social injustice, racism, fascism, abuse, brainwashing, you know, government conspiracies, you know, all these different amazing contributing factors that, you know, basically intertwine in one goal in the story, and that's one man who has been falsely accused of a series of murders, and he's trying to track down the culprit whilst getting next to no help from the government or the authorities. You know, he's got a small band of people who actually trust and believe him, and you know, it's a real emotional journey, but sometimes you can get a little bit lost with like all the different things. Like if me, I wasn't really aware of, you know, German politics and, you know, things that happened in Germany after the Second World War and things like that, you know. So I had to like educate myself a little bit, you know, whilst reading at the same time, you know, kind of doing a bit of research and you know, stuff, just really taking the story. And you know, you can get lost in it a little bit, and you know, there are certain things, like I think I've mentioned previously, or I might not have done, that there are certain parts in the story that are kind of repetitive. Like anytime anybody's like killed or murdered, like it will actually show it. It'll like it'll show them, like, say for example, like someone, like an assassin's pointing a gun at someone. It'll show them pointing the gun, and then it'll basically, like the next shot will be like the facade of a building with, like, you know, the sound effect for like a gunshot sound, and then you'll see like the aftermath of what's actually happened. And that happens quite a lot, you know, to the point where it gets repetitive. But because the story is so good, it's not greatly noticeable, and I only really realised it after, you know, I saw like a few previews of the anime. So yeah, I highly recommend Monster. I would definitely give it a solid 10 out of 10. It really is just perfection, and I really can't think of anything else bad to say about it, because the bad things to say about it are just minor. They're not really bad things, they're just, you know, just things that I just noticed. But you know, at the same time, they really add to the suspense, because that's exactly what it is. It's a suspense thriller. So if you're wanting to read this series next year, you know, if you don't know already, they're going to be reprinting it in 2-in-1 editions. You know, Visa re-releasing it, which is excellent. Maybe doing that to maybe coincide with the production of the live action series, you know, that's going to be aired on HBO or whatever. And then the anime, I believe, is going to be released in 5 parts starting in November. So I'm definitely going to be picking that up. So check out Monster, whether it's the anime or the manga. You know, it's Naoki Urasawa, you know, the master of suspense, and it's phenomenal. You know, I can't really think of anything great to say about it because you just need to check it out. So yeah, Arcane Jump Manga, and I'm signing off. Goodbye.